It's the Blue Collar Breakdown! Welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown! Starting right now!
And welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown. I'm Tom Eddlem. Yeah, I didn't podcast on New Year's Eve. I didn't. Sorry. Spent some time with the wife. Had a good time. Wow, look at all that's happened since then. This was the news week. Nothing much happened during the week between Christmas and New Year's other than we bombed Nigeria, which is not good. Which, for those counting, brought the number of countries Trump bombed in his first year, the first year of his presidency, up to 9. 9 countries he's bombed, including, if you include the boat bombings of Venezuela, Mexico, and Colombia. Okay, so today we're going to do Big Pharma and how the economy is rigged. But before I do that, I want to talk about a couple of other current events. And to do that, I want to start with an old Yakov Smirnov bit. Those of you guys who are go back to the 80s, you might remember Yakov Smirnov. He was I thought fairly funny Russian comedian. And he used to say, "America, I love America. You have things we don't have in Russia, like warning shots. In Russia, if you run from the police, they shoot you, and that's warning for the next guy." And of course, that was meant as a joke, and that was meant. We actually do have things did back in the 1980s have things called warning shots, but now, as we saw from the events this evening with ICE, they don't do warning shots. They just execute you if you try to run from the police, and that's unfortunate. But for those of you guys who are confused, because I know ICE has this strange uniform. I thought I'd make this meme for you so you could tell. Know your shooter. ICE is not ISIS, okay? Yes, ISIS is masked, and ICE will shoot you for not complying. But ICE, the difference is ICE is masked, and ICE will shoot you for not complying. But ICE will also shoot your dog, okay? There you go. There's your meme. Okay. What else happened? Oh, lots of things happened. Let's see. Actually, I made an end of the year meme. Things we lost in 2025. We lost the peace president because President Trump obviously bombed 9 countries. The penny was retired forever. All right. And the nickel is right behind it because the nickel actually costs, I think, 7.5 cents to make a nickel these days over at the Bureau of Printing and Engraving. Or is it the U.S. Mint? Whoever makes the coins. Printing engraving, I think, makes the paper money, which, by the way, now $100 bills weigh more than the equivalent in gold. Just so you know. Okay. What else did we lose? We lost the Epstein files. They've been totally suppressed. The credibility of the Israeli lobby. Doge canceled. They're gone. And also any children in Somali daycares out in Minnesota. So that's what we lost in 2025. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Venezuela. What happened? Well, Trump did an overnight raid a couple of days ago, and he brought Nicholas Maduro on a flight to New York City. Oh, wait, no, that's Bill Clinton in my meme here. But, he brought Nicholas Maduro. So he captured the president of Venezuela. I would say kidnapped. The excuse was that Maduro is a drug dealer and tens of thousands of Americans die every year from drugs. Of course, they die from fentanyl, and none of that comes from Venezuela. Venezuela is a pass-through from Colombia for some cocaine production. as is the United States, as is a lot of countries. It's not a primary source of drugs for the United States. And they said, oh, well, when the drug thing collapsed, they said they had a new excuse, which is that, well, guess what? Nicholas Maduro wasn't the right leader. He wasn't the rightful leader of Venezuela. He lost the election in 2024. So what happens? Well, when Trump captures Maduro, what does he do? He recognizes Maduro's vice presidential running mate as the new president. And when asked about the opposition candidate, Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who, while technically not on the ballot, her party was on the ballot, and they really did win the election. It was a cheat. He says, oh, they don't have enough popular support. So, in other words, we overthrew Venezuela because they were a dictatorship, and we kept the dictatorship in power after we overthrew them. Okay. That's basically what's happened with Venezuela. Also, I think eventually they are going to put Maria Corina Machado in power. I think that was just a President Trump snub of her because she won the Nobel Peace Prize and he coveted it for himself. Although I would say, why would they do that? Why would he do that since he bombed 9 countries? But hey, they gave it to Obama. They gave it to Machado, or I should say Maria Corina. Usually you use the second name in Spanish names. So Maria Corina, they gave it to Corina, even though she advocated the bombing of her own country and never brokered a peace prize, a peace deal. Okay, so I don't know. Maria Corina has a long history of ping-ponging between the United States and Venezuela, and it has a Langley, Virginia tinged flavor to it. Let's put it that way. She has very strong ties with the CIA. And by very strong ties, I mean she's gotten funding from the National Endowment for Democracy in several sequential years, which is a CIA cutout. She had a White House visit to the Bush era White House during that time period. Also was a Yale fellow for a while. So at Yale University, where they recruit lots of CIA operatives, including CIA directors like George Bush Sr. and influencers like William F. Buckley Jr., who was a Yale guy and recruited at Yale. Okay, so there's that, and there were other things also that just scream out. The thing is, she is the head of Vente Venezuela, which is basically the Libertarian Party of Venezuela. I want to like her. I want to believe she's for real. But when she comes out and says, the first thing I'm going to do when I become president is move these Venezuelan embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, I think, now that's like a secret handshake to all the people at Langley, Virginia. I just don't see how that's going to benefit. And then, of course, to get to receive her Nobel Peace Prize in 2025, she was spirited out by a former Navy SEAL. This guy, Brian Stern. He has this private military company called Gray Bull Rescue that spirited her out of Venezuela. And he says, he describes himself as a career naval intelligence guy. And I'm thinking, okay, she's hooked up with the spook boys. That's what it is. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I wish that were not so, but that's it. Okay. Let's go back. Let's get on to our topic today. I'll try to keep it brief because I know I already used up 10 minutes here, and I try to keep it to 30 minutes, the podcast. And I think I'll be able to do it. But before I do, A little bit of news for the podcast. I'll be on the Scott Horton show. Or I shouldn't say I'll be on the Scott Horton show. I plan to be on the Scott Horton show on Friday, scheduling. Scott keeps a busy schedule, but I'll be discussing Venezuela in a little bit more detail than I did just here. That'll be on Friday. And also, I've got a piece coming up at the Libertarian Institute about the MAGA breakup, so you want to make sure that you check that out. All right. Big Pharma. How does government use Big Pharma to rig the economy against the working people and basically to help billionaires? Well, there are a fair number of billionaire pharmaceutical companies. And the most famous case that I could go over is the COVID case. I mean, it's not the only one I'll go over today because that was kind of an exceptional one. But it's the perfect one where you have this perfect match of cronyism, subsidies, gatekeeping regulations, and really even forced customer base. Okay. In 2020, we have this March 2020, everything shuts down. We have COVID. There's a lot of panic about it. It was a very serious flu virus. If you don't want to call it flu, whatever. It was a very serious coronavirus, especially deadly to the elderly and sick. People who are already sick and the elderly. And by all accounts, several million people did die from it. So I want to go, make sure that I don't take that too lightly. But here's what happened. Donald Trump announces Operation Warp Speed. Now, keep in mind, Operation Warp Speed, okay? I'm going to come back to that later, the name. And what it does is he says we're going to spend money and we're going to come up with a cure. And of course, that meant all kinds of big contracts for big pharmaceutical companies. And what happened was 3 companies came up with a COVID vaccine: Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer. So these 3 companies come up with a vaccine and they're immediately marketed. And the clinical studies actually show a higher death rate. Some of them show a higher death rate for those taking the vaccine than those not. But I think if you look at the clinical studies fairly, you realize that they did have some a protective role for the elderly, but it's trotted out as this massive, like, everybody needs to take it. And we started talking almost immediately. It was rolled out as Donald Trump was leaving the White House and Joe Biden was becoming president, getting inaugurated. And I personally remember hearing a lot of Democrats saying, well, I'll be damned if I'm going to take the Trump vaccine. Operation Warp Speed. It's a rush thing. Well, the thing rolls out. Joe Biden's president, and he says, "Oh, it's safe. It's safe and effective." That was the line. And what happened was social media was censored against any kind of complaints of vaccine injuries, censored against any kind of criticism, even some just people who just didn't want to take it. If they wanted to be, I'm trying to think, Christian Scientists or whatever, or people that had religious objections. No, you have to take it or you lose your job. And I knew people that had lost their jobs because they just refused to take the vaccine. So these pharmaceutical companies, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer, not only had the government fund the research for their vaccine, the government paid for the vaccine. So these are guaranteed profits. They didn't have research costs. Basically all of the costs and the risks were socialized and all of the profits were privatized. And what happened? Moderna's stock took off. Interestingly enough, Pfizer's didn't. Pfizer's actually, it went up for a while, but then it went down. But their dividend is over 6%. So that's a pretty high dividend for a stock. But they're still making money and they're still profitable. But anyway, what goes on is it starts coming out that, oh, well, here's the interesting thing. I have several daughters, and one of them said, you know what, I'm just going to take a wait and see. It looks like that the people that are getting hurt from COVID are the people who are elderly and unhealthy, and I'm young and healthy, and I'll just wait a little longer to see what shakes out. And what shook out was that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has since been removed from the market, ended up killing several women who were in birth age, who were capable of childbearing age. And, by waiting, my daughter possibly saved her life. I mean, it's a very small percentage. It was only a few people that they documented that died from it, but it was still a risk that didn't need to be taken. And it was something that was being censored. And of course, later it came out that there was quite a serious risk of, what do they call it? With the inflammation of the heart. I'm trying to think of it. There's a very serious risk of the inflammation of the heart muscles. And I actually had a friend who had it, who was my age. He was at the time, he was 55 or 56 when he got the vaccine, and he spent 11 days in the hospital. And myocarditis and pericarditis, this is what mostly teenage boys got. And the interesting thing is, teenage boys had almost no risk from COVID. Now, the knock from the health establishment was, yeah, but if you get COVID, you're 5 times more likely to get myocarditis or pericarditis. And I have no reason to doubt that. I think it was about 5 times more. But here's the thing. If you do the math, taking the vaccine still puts a teenage boy at higher risk, because the vaccine only lasts a year or so. So you got to get one every year, or sometimes for a while they were recommending it twice a year. But so you think about it, okay, what is your risk of, if you get COVID, you're 5 times more likely to get myocarditis or pericarditis. And it's probably not 0 if you've already taken the vaccine and you get COVID anyway. But let's assume it's 0 for a second there. What is the risk of getting COVID in any particular year? It's actually about 1 in 7. So you actually increase your risk for teenage boys by getting them vaccinated. And of course, there's almost no risk for children to die or anything like that from COVID. So, and all of this was suppressed. It was suppressed on behalf of these pharmaceutical companies who, the excuse was public health or whatever, but really there was no need to do it. They could have just been honest, but instead, the social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter at the time, Twitter was censoring. They would have these propagandists come on the bought and paid for captive media day after day, saying if you're not getting vaccinated, you're killing your grandmother. Even if your grandmother's already vaccinated, which didn't make any sense whatsoever. If the vaccine works, your grandmother's safe. It was just absolutely insane. And the propaganda was very strong. And it was all to pad these profits for big pharma. Okay, that's COVID. That was 5 years ago. Come on, you might argue. That was an exception. It was a crazy pandemic. It was a once in a lifetime thing. But there are tons of other cases where government uses regulations and subsidies. I'm going to talk more about regulations than subsidies here, but it's mostly regulations that raise pharmaceutical products prices. And a lot of it's done through the patent mechanism. The patent is an idea. It's in the U.S. Constitution. Basically, if you invent something, you get 20 years of exclusive use of it so that you could sell it and make up your money. And pharmaceutical companies, as a free market capitalist, I would say, hey, they put money into research for these things. They should be able to pull the money out and recoup their costs. That makes sense. But in many instances, you have is this abuse of the patent system, where things are patented which are basically the same thing, and that of something that's already in the public domain, but maybe there's some slight little difference, or maybe like in the case of insulin, you have a different transmission method. Instead you have a port, or you have a inhaler, or whatever it is, and they find a way to get it repatented many years after the fact. And of course, one of the worst cases was this guy Martin Shkreli, who took this AIDS drug that was selling for $13.50 a pill and began to charge $750 a pill. He knew the patent was still out, and he said, hey, I could really make a lot of money out of this. The company is kind of cheap. I'll buy the company, raise the price of the pill, and it's a life-saving drug, so people have to buy it. And as a result, of course, he ended up not making too much money out of it, because people were just absolutely, he became the biggest villain on Wall Street. But there's a lot of that kind of greed going on in companies to a lesser extent that's more under the radar. I mean, if you look at the top, how do I put it? The most expensive chemotherapies. I mean, cancer is big business. They're all over $1 million a year for treatment. The most expensive chemotherapy treatments are all over $1 million a year. And then, we've got immunotherapy, which is also cancer treatment. And, the biggest one there is Keytruda. That's $200,000 a year. It's way more than the manufacturing cost, which, by the way, with Keytruda, it's manufactured by Merck, which is a $65 billion a year company. They make $30 billion a year out of just Keytruda. Merck, almost half its revenue is Keytruda. Okay. But it is expensive to manufacture, but it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It's relatively expensive, but it's not that expensive. So the patents are a double-edged sword. Patents are an exception to the free market, right? I mean, they prevent competition, at least for a period of time. But even things that are in public domain, like take, for example, insulin. Insulin was invented in 1921. It's been in the public domain for almost 100 years. So why is it so expensive? In fact, in the United States, it's many times more expensive than it is in other countries. And until recently, under the Biden administration, they negotiated the price down to $35 per dose, but it had been several $100s per dose up until then. It was so much more expensive than other countries, but even at $35 a dose, it's still much more expensive than other countries. And you think, well, why is that? Well, it's kind of a complicated thing. Healthcare is a swirling mass of regulations and middlemen that try to obscure all of the grifting going on, rather than doing a straight storefront and saying this is the price or whatever. There's this thing called, what is it called? Pharmacy benefit. I can't even read my own writing. Pharmacy benefit managers, where you have this middleman with the insurance companies, and they all want kickbacks. And basically, the pharmacy benefit managers are these negotiators who say, well, what's going to be an appropriate, a covered drug under an insurance plan. Now, you would think, gee, insulin would be a covered drug, or if it's not covered, you would already know. You wouldn't need a benefit manager. You wouldn't need anyone, any sort of a company to make that determination. I mean, it would be pretty obvious. But all of these companies get these little kickbacks, and as a result, they charge more. Also, one of the other things is, until 2020, this is one of the reforms that the Biden administration did. And I'll give him props for that. This is one thing that made it better. Insulin used to be regulated as a drug rather than a biologic. And then you think, well, what does that mean? Well, a drug requires, if you bring a drug into a market, you have to do all kinds of clinical trials and tests, and it's a very onerous process. In fact, one of the knocks against the FDA is that a lot of these drugs take many, many years to get to market when they could be saving lives. And the patents often are half run out. It's like 7 or 8, 9, 10 years through the patent, because what the patent starts the time you say, I've invented this. So when it gets to market, they've only got 10 years to recoup their costs. But in this case, to get another insulin provider in the market, almost all of the insulin provided in the United States up until 2020 were 3 companies that Eli Lilly and 2 others that I'd never, unless you're a diabetic, you probably would never heard of. There were 3 companies maintain the entire insulin market, so they are able to basically jack the prices up. And why did 3 companies maintain this? Because even though the prices were so high, why didn't competition get in there and the free market get in there? Because they would have had a 4th competitor or a 5th competitor would have had to go through all of these clinical trials as if it were an entirely new drug, even though it's the same insulin since 1921. So you have government providing these barriers to protect politically connected giant multi-billion-dollar corporations and their profits. And that is the real threat to America today. Although I wrote an article last month about how billionaires are the real threat. Billionaires, not socialism, are the real threat to the American free market. And Donald Trump has made his rejoinder to me. Actually, I think this came out. I don't know if this came out today or yesterday, but he said, in relation to his Venezuela, this is my way to tie everything back in as I close out. He said on a Truth Social tweet, "I'm pleased to announce that the interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality sanctioned oil to the United States of America. The oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America to ensure that it is used for the benefit of the people of Venezuela and the United States. I have asked Energy Secretary Chris Wright to execute this plan immediately. It will be taken by storage ships and brought directly to unloading docks to the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter, blah, blah, blah." And I blah, blah, blah the President of the United States because, well, that's all he basically does. But here's the thing. Socialism is what? Government ownership of the means of production. And guess what? Donald Trump is taking over the means of production, oil production in Venezuela. One of our knocks, one of the reasons we invaded Venezuela was because they had nationalized the industry, and Trump said they stole our oil. Now he's stealing the oil from Venezuela. It's weird how our oil always seems to get underneath their forests and sand, doesn't it? Our oil always seems to hide under their sand, their forests. It's weird how oil hides that way. But the point is, Trump has introduced socialism. This is government ownership of the means of production. And I stand corrected. Apparently, socialism is a threat to America. I stand corrected. Okay, that's it. I am going to sign off here. I want to thank you. I want to mention, as I already should have from the outset, make sure you like, you subscribe, you share, and you can buy me a coffee through the link. I already had one person recently joined, and anonymously. I appreciate that. I'm going to keep doing this podcast as long as I can. I am going to have a break in the spring, but I'm going to probably have some produced pieces that I send out through the podcast, even during that time period where I need to take a break. And I'm going to break now. Thank you. God bless.